It was a routine test aboard USS Iowa. Inside Turret 2, the massive 16-inch guns prepared to fire. The right gun was reported loaded. Seconds later, the left gun followed suit. But something was wrong with the center gun. A message crackled over the turret's phone circuit, quote, "We have a problem here. We are not ready yet. We have a problem here." The preparations continued despite the warning. Standard procedure rapidly deteriorated into confusion. The crew of Turret 2 worked frantically to resolve the issue. Warning signs multiplied as seconds ticked by. Then came a final desperate cry, piercing through the communication system, quote, "Oh my God, the powder is smoldering." A powerful and deadly new experiment was about to go totally wrong. Unauthorized experiments. On March 10, 1988, after returning from a deployment in the Persian Gulf, the battleship USS Iowa docked in Norfolk, Virginia for maintenance. By late May, newly appointed Captain Fred Muesli made a critical decision. They canceled a planned $1 million repair package for Iowa's main gun batteries, opting instead to spend the money overhauling the ship's power plant. This decision ignored the ship's urgent need for repairs on critical systems, 75 detailed deficiencies that remained unaddressed. Nonetheless, these issues would not become immediate problems. Yet. In the months following, USS Iowa sailed on sea trials around Chesapeake Bay, then proceeded to refresher training in Florida and Puerto Rico. However, from September 1988 until the end of the year, the ship's gun crews received minimal training, and the main guns experienced more serious ongoing maintenance issues. According to Ensign Dan Mayer, the officer in charge of Turret 1, the situation was chipping away at the seafarers' morale. In January 1989, two senior officers, Master Chief Fire Controlman Stephen Skelly and Gunnery Officer Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Michael Costigan, pushed forward with an experimental plan to increase the range of Iowa's main guns. The proposed tests revolved around using supercharged powder bags and specially designed shells. Many officers on board, including Mayer, believed this was a reckless move. Turrets 1 and 2 were old, in poor condition, and already plagued by numerous failures. Despite their concerns, Captain Muesli was misled into thinking the experiments were sanctioned. But this was not the case. The approval had come from a civilian in the safety office at the Naval Sea Systems Command, who had no authority to give such approval. The decision was concealed from higher-ups, leaving Iowa's crew at the mercy of dangerous experiments. The experiment would go ahead. On January 20th, 1989, off Vieques Island, Turret 1 fired 6 experimental shells using the new powder bags. One shell reportedly traveled 23.4 nautical miles, a record for a conventional 16-inch shell. However, the experiment left much of the crew uneasy. Mayer and Petty Officer First Class Dale Mortensen, the gun chief for Turret 1, refused to participate in any further tests. Skelly then sought out Turret 2, where Senior Chief Reggie Ziegler initially refused to allow the experiment. However, his superior officer in charge of Turret 2 reluctantly agreed. A week later, another risky maneuver took place. USS Iowa's new executive officer ordered a main battery drill, ignoring warnings from the gun crews. Turrets 1 and 2 fired with a dangerous 15-degree offset, forcing one of Turret 2's guns to fire directly over Turret 1. As the left gun loaded, a powder bag began to smolder, seconds from disaster. The gun captain barely managed to slam the breech block shut before it fired on its own. The concussion tore apart Turret 1's gun bloomers, wrecked its electrical system, and left stunned crew members scrambling amid the chaos of the blast. Mayer later recalled, quote, "The shockwave blew out the turret officer's switchboard. We had no power, no lights for a time. Men were screaming. There was panic." The situation on board was deteriorating fast. Morale was plummeting, and senior crew members were beginning to voice their concerns. Gunner's Mate Third Class Scott Blakey, who had concerns about the experiments, summed up the situation bluntly, quote, "We shouldn't be doing them. Something could go wrong." When asked why they kept at it, he could only reply, quote, "We don't have a choice." The risks had only escalated as Iowa prepared for a fleet exercise, firing 2,700-pound shells, using old powder designed for lighter projectiles. Crew members had no training for loading non-standard 5-bag charges. Meanwhile, the rammerman was working under dangerous conditions, with no safety devices in place to prevent a potentially catastrophic mistake. With little choice, the crew pressed forward, unaware that a disaster was fast approaching. Fire in the hole. On April 19th, at 8:31 a.m., the crew of USS Iowa was given orders to take their stations in the ship's main turrets. By 9:03, turrets 1, 2, and 3 were reported as manned and ready to begin a standard firing drill. The drill commenced with Turret 1 firing first at 9:33 a.m. However, a malfunction occurred when the left gun misfired, and the crew was unable to resolve the issue. The order came from Mussolini to move to Turret 2, instructing its crew to fire a 3-gun salvo, bypassing the unresolved issue in Turret 1. Turret 2's crew began preparations. The right gun was ready to fire after 44 seconds, and soon after, the left gun was also ready. But then a problem emerged. Eric Lawrence, stationed in the center gun room, radioed Ziegler with increasing urgency, stating, quote, "We have a problem here. We are not ready yet." Ziegler responded, trying to downplay the situation, quote, "Left gun loaded, good job. Center gun's having a little trouble. We'll straighten that out." Lawrence again insisted, quote, "I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet." Suddenly, the gun crew's phone circuit crackled with panic as Ernie Hunyetz, Turret 2's leading petty officer, shouted urgently, quote, "Mort, Mort, Mort." Just then, Ziegler noticed that the gunpowder was smoldering. By now, it was clear something had gone terribly wrong. Ziegler opened the rear turret door to check the center gun room while yelling for the crew to close the breach. Hunyetz's next words sent a chill through the crew, quote, "Oh my God, there's a flash." Only 81 seconds after Mussolini's order to load, Turret 2's center gun exploded. A fireball over 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit blasted from the center gun, tearing through bulkheads at 2,000 feet per second. The explosion caved in doors, crumpled walls, and filled all 3 gun rooms with fire and toxic cyanide gas. Flames ignited 2,000 pounds of powder bags, turning the turret into an inferno. 9 minutes later, another explosion, likely carbon monoxide igniting, rattled the ship. Steel warped, smoke choked the corridors, and emergency crews scrambled, but it was too late. 47 men were trapped inside. None survived. Below, 12 crewmen in the magazine barely escaped, saved by blast doors that held. Above, Turret 2 was a charred wreck, its guns silenced. The battleship, built for war, had instead suffered destruction from within. The fire was finally extinguished after 90 minutes of relentless effort. Among the wreckage, Mortensen discovered the body of Gunner's Mate Second Class Clayton Hartwig at the bottom of the center gun pit. He also noted that the powder hoist had not been lowered, which was an unusual condition. After the fire was doused, the investigation began. Operations Specialist First Class James Drake from USS Coral Sea was called in as ordnance disposal technician. After inspecting the scene in the center gun room, Drake believed the explosion was caused by compressing powder bags too quickly against the 16-inch shell. Meanwhile, when Turret 1's left gun was inspected, it was found that a powder bag had been turned sideways, an indication of improper loading. In the aftermath, a cleanup crew was instructed to make the turret, quote, look as normal as possible. This meant discarding any damaged equipment into the ocean. Likewise, one fireman at the scene said, quote, no one was preserving the evidence. Meanwhile, Mussolini met with officers to discuss how to limit their testimonies in the impending investigation, a move that raised suspicions of a cover-up. By April 23rd, USS Iowa had returned to Norfolk for a memorial service, attended by President George H.W. Bush, who announced in his speech, quote, I promise you today, we will find out why, the circumstances of this tragedy. In a subsequent press conference, Mussoli claimed the crew members were all qualified. Shortly after the service, it came to light that Hartwig had taken out a life insurance policy worth $50,000, naming Kendall Truitt, his superior and friend, as the beneficiary. This revelation sparked controversy, particularly when Hartwig's family members questioned whether the money would reach them. This detail would become increasingly suspect when rumors began circulating that Truitt and Hartwig were having a secret love affair, a narrative that would move Hartwig to the very center of the investigation. The easy scapegoat. Despite the lack of conclusive evidence, the Navy swiftly focused on blaming Clayton Hartwig for the Iowa explosion. Commodore Richard D. Milligan's investigation, launched within hours, lacked formal structure. Witnesses weren't under oath, and Hartwig, the deceased, couldn't defend himself. During an interview, gunner's mate Mayer briefly mentioned the gunnery experiments, but Milligan's chief of staff silenced him with an aggressive warning. As the investigation continued, Mayer and other witnesses had parts of their testimonies altered or removed. By May, the press began circulating leaks about Hartwig, hinting at personal grievances. As pressure mounted, the Naval Investigative Service questioned Hartwig's family and friends, probing for motives. However, there was no evidence. Regardless, the media played along. Stories from the Washington Post and NBC News claimed Hartwig intentionally caused the explosion, framing him as alienated and vengeful. They even found a certain book in Hartwig's locker, which the media seized on as a bomb-making guide, and therefore proof of sabotage. The FBI also reinforced the Navy's focus on Hartwig, concluding that he'd orchestrated the incident, quote, in such a fashion that he hoped it would appear to be an accident. This dubious conclusion and fixation on Hartwig's personal life steered any attention away from technical failures that could have caused the blast. On July 15, 1989, Milligan submitted his completed report. It claimed the explosion was a deliberate act, probably committed by Hartwig. According to Milligan's findings, Hartwig deliberately forced the powder bags too deeply into the center gun to activate a timing device he had allegedly hidden between the charges. One endorsement of Milligan's report stated that his conclusion about Hartwig, quote, leaves the reader incredulous, yet the opinion is supported by facts and analysis from which it flows logically and inevitably. While another endorsement stated that Hartwig was, quote, the individual who had motive, knowledge, and physical position within the turret gunroom to place a device in the powder train. Naval investigators rejected an alternative explanation, suggesting that a chemical detonator, rather than an electronic timing device, had caused the blast. Meanwhile, Hartwig's family disputed the allegations that he was depressed and self-destructive to the point of disregarding the lives of his fellow seamen. What's more, many seamen's families, including those of the victims, told the media that their loved ones had privately voiced concerns about training issues and dangerous gunfire experiments on USS Iowa, warnings that came well before the explosion. Soon after, several journalists questioned the results of Milligan's investigation. A reporter for the Richmond Times-Dispatch uncovered illegal powder experiments, conflicts of interest in the investigation, and inadequate crew training, challenging the Navy's sabotage theory. The Associated Press, Daily Press, ABC, New York Times, 2020, and 60 Minutes all questioned the Navy's findings, criticizing what seemed to be a strategy of scapegoating the fallen sailors. In early October, the credibility of Milligan's report began to unravel. Mussoli and Bob Finney, Iowa's operations officer, received non-punitive admonitions, meaning their records would remain clear. Kissinger and Skelly did receive punitive letters and faced modest fines, but even those were later suspended. The Navy lashed out, claiming that safety violations and training issues aboard USS Iowa were unrelated to the explosion. In response, the Senate Armed Services Committee called for a hearing to review the Navy's handling of the investigation. Testimony suggested Hartwig was innocent, and the Navy might be covering up an accident. In March 1990, the House Armed Services Committee published its report, titled USS Iowa Tragedy, an Investigative Failure. It criticized the Navy for prematurely concluding sabotage. Roadblocks and revelations. The Navy finally turned to Sandia National Laboratories, a Department of Energy research facility, for an independent assessment. 40 Sandia scientists examined the Navy's claim that a deliberate ignition device triggered the explosion. Their first step was to compare the projectiles from all 3 guns in Turret 2 for evidence. However, they soon learned that these projectiles had been misplaced and could not be found, hindering the investigation's progress. The inquiry took a new direction when Sandia's team explored possible links to past explosions aboard USS Mississippi, a New Mexico-class battleship that had served in both World Wars. But the Navy further discouraged Sandia's investigation into the Mississippi explosions, with top brass noting that it should not be discussed. Meanwhile, Sandia's team, led by Richard Schwobel, came to reject the chemical igniter theory, determining traces found by Navy technicians were from a cleaning solution and common maritime materials, and not an igniter. Schwobel and the Sandia team then investigated another possibility, and found the powder bags were rammed in farther than expected. Their simulation showed the excess pressure could have ignited the powder. The investigation hit a roadblock when one member of the Naval Sea Systems Command, Captain Joseph Dominic Maselli, refused to replicate drop tests using actual 16-inch gunpowder bags. They argued the tests were irrelevant to real gun conditions, although some speculated that they were possibly worried of what they might prove. Undeterred, on May 14th, the Navy was forced to conduct the tests, with Sandia joining in. The results were undeniable. The overram theory was confirmed, leading to a rejection of the sabotage theory. It was soon suggested by the Government Accountability Office that the battleship should be considered for deactivation. Meanwhile, a second Navy investigation was launched, promising to be different, free from the biases of the first inquiry. But as soon as it was announced that the same man who had pushed the sabotage theory, Joseph Maselli, would be leading the new investigation, doubts crept in. Meanwhile, Schwobel and his team at Sandia had uncovered too much to stand on the side. Despite oversight from a technical board, Maselli seemed intent on controlling the scope of the new tests. When fresh overram tests began in June 1990, he initially kept them at low speeds, far lower than what might have occurred inside the turret. Sandia's representatives watched with growing frustration. Then, at 14 feet per second, one of the tests finally triggered an explosion. The implications were clear. An overram could ignite the powder. But Maselli resisted further high-speed testing. When one technician found that even slower overrams could be dangerous, Maselli ordered him to stop. This wasn't just resistance, it was obstruction. Furious at the stonewalling, Schwobel took his concerns up the chain of command and demanded more tests. His persistence paid off. By mid-July, additional testing triggered 4 more explosions, making the overram theory impossible to dismiss. Yet, despite this overwhelming evidence, the Navy pressed forward as if nothing had changed. Some minor safety modifications were made, removing trim layers from powder bags, color-coding the rammer, ordering more training, but nothing was said about the investigation's real findings. Instead of admitting a fatal flaw in their gun operation procedures, they moved on. Then came the final blow to the sabotage theory. In November, the search finally paid off. Deep inside a warehouse in Dahlgren, 2 long-missing projectiles from Turret 2, the left and right guns, were found. The Sandia team wasted no time. They ran tests, examined every inch, and the results were undeniable. The same iron fibers, the same chemicals that had been found in the center gun's shell were present on these as well. It was the proof they'd been looking for. Schwobel didn't mince words. Quote, "It should have ended the Navy's case against Hartwig right then and there." But the Navy refused to back down. Maselli's final report still claimed sabotage. After spending $25 million, the Navy stood by its original stance. Only in October of the following year did they admit they had no proof of sabotage or accident. Consequently, they were ordered to never again use a single officer board for such cases. Tainted memorials. USS Iowa was decommissioned in 1990 and joined the reserve fleet. The battleship was later moved to California, where she became a floating museum in 2012. Milligan and Maselli retired in 1992, their careers intact, despite their roles in the flawed investigation. Milligan moved into academia and insurance, while Maselli faded from public view. Mussoli retired in May 1990, using his change of command ceremony to criticize the Navy's handling of the case, saying, quote, "Only God knows what really happened." He later went to work for Lockheed Martin, the American defense manufacturer. Meanwhile, Mayer resigned in protest, accusing Mussoli and others of a cover-up. His criticisms were censored from his discharge papers. Kendall Truitt, the man accused of an affair with Hartwig, and who defended him until the end, was denied re-enlistment in apparent retaliation. He also promised that he would give the life insurance payout to Hartwig's family. The Navy moved on. Clayton Hartwig's reputation never recovered. In 1991, the Hartwig family sued the Navy for emotional distress under the Federal Tort Claims Act. The case survived initial dismissal attempts, but was ultimately thrown out in 1999, as defamation claims were barred by sovereign immunity. The family also sued NBC News for $10 million, arguing that its reporting had falsely portrayed Hartwig as a violent, unhinged, self-destructive individual. NBC denied the claims of libel, since its information came from Naval Investigative Service leaks. A federal judge agreed and dismissed the case. 47 sailors perished. Hartwig's reputation was ruined. The truth had been clear for months, yet the Navy had fought it until the very end. A memorial at Iowa Point honors those that fell, but no tribute can undo the damage, neither to the men lost to the explosion nor to Hartwig, wrongfully blamed for their demise.